after a racist police do something to us. We need them out of the police. We need all these racist people gone. We need change, and we can get that by voting. Now, while we marched in 750 miles, everybody that came and chastised us, everybody that came with shotguns, everybody that came messing with us had Trump signs. Trump 2020. That's the new way that they exhibit racism in this country and hide behind it. So we got to vote Trump out of office, all right? So when it's time to vote, we going to vote. And if y'all see me up here, if you an activist, stop me out there so we can organize. It's time. This is the revolution. This is the revolution.
Our next speaker is David Clooney. He's the executive director of the Black Economic Alliance, the nation's only coalition of business leaders and aligned advocates committed to economic progress and prosperity in the Black community, with a specific focus on work, wages, and wealth. Before joining BEA, David led the state and local government relations team at J.B. Morgan Chase & Company. He's a graduate of Howard University School of Law, where he was editor-in-chief of the Law Review, and the University of Albany State University of New York, and sits on the board of the National Urban League. Please welcome David G. Clooney.
I'm David Clooney. I lead the Black Economic Alliance, a group of Black business leaders and allies dedicated to improving work, wages, and wealth for Black people. We know the 1963 March on Washington was a march for jobs and freedom. In over 50 years, the wealth gap between Black and white Americans has not changed significantly. In fact, by some measures, it's even wider today. But we're at an inflection point. It may have taken 400 years plus 8 minutes and 46 seconds to get here, but there is an increasing recognition that systemic racism continues to oppress Black people in every part of American life. So what do we do with this moment? Of course, we need to continue to fight for social justice, but we also need to fight for economic justice from our elected leaders and in the business community. We need to fight for better work, wages, and wealth for Black people. That's skills training for the future of work, closing the Black-white pay gap, and building generational wealth for Black families. Right now, we absolutely have to vote. Congress should pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to ensure free and fair elections, and just like we're showing up to march across America, we have to show up and vote. Over 40 states will allow early voting this year, so vote early if you can. Make a plan and make sure your vote is counted well before Election Day. We owe it to the civil rights giants who marched, bled, and died for us. We owe it to the families of countless Black people lost to unchecked institutional racism. We owe it to America to help her keep her promise to all of us. I am so inspired by the demand for justice that's emanating from every corner of America right now. We have to continue this march on every platform we have, in the streets, in the halls of Congress, in the corporate boardrooms, and with our vote, so we can finally achieve social and economic justice. Thank you.
Coming to the stage is Portia Taylor. She's a brand builder, music lover, sport bike rider. Portia Taylor is the founder of Black Girls Ride, a magazine and community originally launched as a place for women of color who ride, which has since grown to include all women. What inspired her to launch Black Girls Ride was the lack of representation that she saw when she started riding, especially long distance. when not developing brand campaigns, spinning at the hottest parties, or on her way up to, quote, occupy the gym, Portia can be found rolling in her pink habaya. I know I said that wrong. I don't even ride. And always living her best life. Please welcome Portia Taylor.
Good afternoon. I'm Portia Taylor, and I'm here as a representative of Black Girls Ride. More than a magazine, we are a movement of women passionate about motorsports. Over 100 women rode across America to be with you here today. We are our ancestors' wildest dreams. Women of color on ground traveling across the land of the free. We are your mothers, your grandmothers, your aunts, your sisters, and your daughters. Our ride started Monday in Long Beach, California. As we rode through Texas, I thought about my soror, Sandra Bland, and how a simple traffic stop ended in her death. We all witnessed George Floyd's death as he cried for help, the heartbreaking death of Breonna Taylor as she slept in her home. And less than a week ago, Jacob Blake was shot 7 times in the back and paralyzed. With each act of senseless violence, we feel a stirring in our collective soul. When a call to march was issued, we knew it was time to mount up. We packed up our bikes and rode thousands of miles in protest against police brutality. We ride unapologetically for Black lives, and we raise our throttle hand in support of those on the front line of our struggle. We ride to ensure the freedom of our future leaders. We've come a long way, but our journey is not over. In November, Black Girls Ride will rev our engines. We will lead the ride to the polls and fuel the ballot boxes of this nation to choose a leader that will provide the unity our country desperately needs. We invite you to join in this and vote like your life depends on it. Thank you.
Our next speaker really needs no introduction and stays on the front line. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. She's an activist, a legislator, a survivor, and the first woman of color to be elected to Congress from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Throughout her career as a public servant, Congresswoman Pressley has fought to ensure that those closest to the pain are closest to the power, driving and informing policymaking. Prior to her being elected to Congress, she served on the Boston City Council for 8 years and was the first woman of color elected to the council in its 100-year history. Please welcome Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley.
Good morning, beloved. Today, I am thinking of the ancestors, not just the ones recorded in our history books, but the ones omitted from those pages. The justice seekers, the freedom riders, the organizers, the community builders, every loved one that packed a brown bag lunch, led a freedom song, risked their life and livelihood, that Vaselined an elbow and sent up a prayer. Their sacrifice and self-determination shaped history and brought us to this moment. The truth of the matter is, we are because of them. We are Black with a capital B. We are the manifestation of the movement. We are a symbol of social, political, and cultural progress. If my granddaddy, the Reverend E. James Eccles, were here, he would whisper in my ear and say, "Grandbaby, make it plain." And I intend to do just that, make it plain. We are in unprecedented, uncertain times. We are challenged by the state of the nation and the crisis we face, but the state of our movements, it is strong. and another world is possible. Yes, it is possible to legislate justice and accountability. People over profits, joy over trauma, freedom over fear. Yes, it is possible to write budgets that actually value Black lives. If it feels unfamiliar, that's because it has never been done in America. We will meet the moment. We will work towards healing, justice, and collective liberation like our lives depend on it, because they do. We will march on, clear in our conviction, rooted in our faith, grounded in our history, intentional as we build. Let me make it plain. Black lives matter.
Our next speaker is Representative Adriano Espaillat. Espaillat proudly represents New York's 13th Congressional District, first elected to Congress in 2016. Espaillat is serving his second term in Congress, where he serves as a member of the influential U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee, the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, and the House Small Businesses Committee. Throughout his 10-year career in public service, the congressman has been a vocal advocate for protecting tenants, improving schools, and making serious, smart investments in economic development, job creation, environmental protection. Prior to coming to Congress, he served as a New York State Senator, during which he represented the neighborhoods of Marble Hill, Inwood, Washington Heights, Hamilton Heights, West Harlem, Upper West Side, Hell's Kitchen, Clinton, and Chelsea. Please welcome U.S. Representative Adriano Espaillat.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Reverend Al Sharpton. Thank you, National Action Network. Thank you all for being here on this great morning. I bring you greetings from Harlem, the capital of the African diaspora in the world. From East Harlem, the launching pad of the Latino experience in New York State. From immigrant Washington Heights, Hamilton Heights, Inwood, and working class Northwest Bronx. Over 50 years ago, the great Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lewis stood here and shared their dreams with all of you. Today, as the first formally undocumented member of Congress, I stand here with you today to say that yes, I am a man. That yes, we shall overcome. That yes, sí se puede. That yes, Black Lives Matter. And that yes, without no justice, there will be no peace. We come here today burying the scars and the wounds of 400 years of struggle, to say that whether your ancestors picked cotton or whether they cut sugarcane, we're all in the same boat right now. We must pass legislation to ensure that there is police reform. We must pass the pieces of legislation highlighted in the Harlem manifesto against police brutality that are all included in the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. Let's get rid of the chokehold. Let's get rid of the knee. We also must pass the John Lewis Voters' Rights Advancement Act to ensure that we all be able to vote. We must enact criminal justice reform. Let's do away with the death penalty. Let's do away with solitary confinement. Let's do away with mandatory minimums. I am a man. We shall overcome. Sí se puede. No justice, no peace, and Black Lives Matter. God bless you and keep the faith.
Up next is Representative Charles Booker, a 36-year-old state legislator born in Louisville, Kentucky. He successfully ran for State House in Kentucky in 2018, becoming the youngest African-American in the House in more than 90 years, where he fought for common-sense gun safety reform, prescription drug cost relief, voter protection and restoration in support of labor unions, for economic justice, against racial injustice, and more. Representative Booker recently founded Hood to the Holler, a 501c4 to capture the energy and infrastructure he built in his run to continue to build power, work on voter registration, and more, and to help positively transform our future. Please welcome Representative Charles Booker.
We stand here in the legacy of the dream that Dr. King lifted up, that Whitney Young pushed for, that Mattie Jones fought for, that my granddad Lindsey E. Hearn Sr. demanded. We're here today because we know that dream is not done. Because although they marched for us then, the cries we're hearing across the country right now, from Kenosha to Kentucky, from the hood where I'm from, to the hollers in Appalachia, to everywhere in between, those cries let us know we have more marching to do. And it is in this moment where we must rise up together. Because listen, we are built for this moment. We are on the shoulders of giants, but we must step off of those shoulders and lead ourselves. We are the dream, but we must turn that dream into demands. Demands for real justice. Demands for humanity. Demands for accountability. Demands for an end to poverty. Demands for an end to racism. And I am a living witness as the youngest black state legislator in Kentucky since the first one. And yes, I did stand up to run against Mitch McConnell. I am a personal witness that we are ready for this moment. We're built for the work we must do. And if we come together, all of us, if we stand united, if we march together, if we bend that arc together, there is nothing we can't do. There is no mountain we can't move. And there is no root of racism we cannot pull up. So we got to do it right now. We got to do it yesterday, so we definitely got to do it now. And I stand here as a young man in the legacy of a giant, Congressman John Lewis, who said 57 years ago some words that still ring true right now. We have to lift our voices together and say to America, wake up. Wake up, America. Because we can't stop. We cannot quit. And we cannot be patient. Let's win together. Let's fight together. Let's transform our future. Breonna, I'm representing you right now. Thank you all.
Next, we have Tyleek McMillan. He serves as the National Director of Youth and College Engagement and is a policy advisor for the National Action Network. A recent graduate of North Carolina A&T State University, Tyleek is a proud member of Phi Beta Sigma fraternity, the Eta chapter, and hopes to one day serve as a legislator on the Hill. Please welcome Tyleek McMillan.
I give honor to the conveners, my boss and mentor, Reverend Al Sharpton, and Martin Luther King III. I also want to recognize the young leaders standing behind me from Nan Youth Huddle and Nan Collegiate. We find ourselves here in the spirit of John Lewis, making good trouble, necessary trouble, because the soul of our democracy is depending on it. We're not here to ask for justice. We're not here to negotiate justice, but we are here to demand justice. Far too many times we have been cut out. Far too many times we have been budgeted out, counted out, resourced out. It's time for legislators to invest in education. It's time for legislators to invest in mental health services. It's time to invest in communities. And I love my 1891. It's time to invest in historically black colleges and universities. Because we don't deserve just a half a dollar. We don't just deserve the quarter of the dollar, but we deserve the whole dollar. Dr. King spoke about the check that bounced in the bank of justice. And we've come to let the teller know at the bank that this check better not bounce. Because we will march and we will fight, because that's what we deserve. In the words of Dr. King in closing, and again, we come to cash the check, a check that is willing to demand the riches of freedom and security of justice. Thank you. No justice. No peace. Great job.
I hear you back there. No justice! No justice! That's just to echo you. Next up, we have Janet Muriga. As someone who has experienced the promise of the American dream firsthand, Janet has devoted her career in public service to opening the door to that dream to millions of American families. As a key figure in the Latino community, she continues this mission as president and CEO of Unidos US, a large national Hispanic civil rights and advocacy organization in the U.S. Welcome her to the stage.
Hello, hola. My name is Janet Murguia, and I'm president and CEO of Unidos US, the largest Latino civil rights and advocacy organization in the country. I want to tell you why I am here. I am here because we have stood and always will stand with Reverend Sharpton and Martin Luther King III and our brothers and sisters in the black community until systemic and institutional racism in our society is eradicated. I am here because 25% of my community is Afro-Latino. So we don't just empathize, we identify with the black community. I am here because we need law enforcement to get their knees off the necks of our black and Latinx young men. I am here because what we have seen in Kenosha, Wisconsin this week, a man shot in the back and paralyzed, peaceful protesters shot and killed by white nationalist vigilantes as the police have turned a blind eye, and silence from the man who holds the highest office in the land. That is immoral and unacceptable. I am here because our communities are bearing the brunt of a pandemic, both in lives and livelihoods, that is only getting worse yet. I am here because we have in common, what we have in common is far greater than what divides us. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote to Cesar Chavez in 1966, our separate struggles are really one, a struggle for freedom, for dignity, and humanity. I am here because we must support the young people of every background here as they rise up, make their voices heard, and tell those of their generation about the America that they want to see. Because we must reject bigotry and hate and insist that our country live up to its ideals and the values that we share. I am here because I am standing on the shoulders of giants like Congressman John Lewis to say, your fight is my fight. Tu lucha es mi lucha. I am here because Black lives matter. Sí se puede. Adelante. Muchísimas gracias.
Up next, we have Reverend Dr. Richardson, who serves on the board of several corporations and national organizations and is currently chairman of the board for the National Action Network. Reverend Dr. W. Franklin Richardson is pastor of the historic Grace Baptist Church in Mount Vernon, New York. He leads the largest African-American church in Westchester County, with a membership base of over 3,000 parishioners. Despite the interaction with U.S. presidents and heads of states, he has made sure to use the power of the pulpit to lift up local issues in the Mount Vernon area and nationwide. Dr. Richardson believes that grace must be at the vanguard of liberation and empowerment of African American people through our Christian faith. Please welcome Reverend Dr. W. Franklin Richardson.
Good afternoon. Let's give ourselves a celebration. Look at how we've turned out in the midst of the pandemic, in the midst of all that's going on. This is important to us. We lay ourselves on the line because this is important. On behalf of the members of the board of National Action Network, I want to thank all of the various organizations who have collaborated with us to bring this to pass. We celebrate the great leadership of our President, Reverend Al Sharpton, and Martin Luther King III, having convened us together. But our coming together for the speeches and the rhetoric of the moment will be meaningless if we do not leave here and activate and get involved and fight the fight and vote and encourage those who are not. We are at a crossroads in American history. We're at the intersection of perish or promise. If we fail to deliver in November, we will perish. If we fail to bring out our votes, we will not enjoy what we have struggled from. We're at a moment when all that we have fought for, all that our forefathers and mothers have died for, is at risk of being lost. Blood that's been shed for our freedoms is on the line, and we cannot perish. We must stand up. We must fight. We must engage every resource that we have. We still believe in America's promise. Not only are we on the precipice of perishing, but we're on the precipice of realizing the promise. And the promise is a nation where every person, black or white, yellow, red, male, female, LBGT, every dimension of our humanity is in the promise of a great America. And so I challenge us all to believe in a better day, to make the sacrifices, to make sure we go back to our cities and knock on doors and call our friends, because this will be a sham if we fail to bring out the vote on November the 3rd. This will be mockery if we do not deliver ourselves to the polls. This will be a disgrace if we fail to engage our resources to deliver on our own behalf, and our forefathers and mothers who lay in the cemeteries will want to turn over in their graves if we fail to deliver in this moment and grasp what they fought for. God bless you. Let's go. Let's get this done. We're able. We're powerful. Use the UR code that's on the screen that talks about the Black Church 75, vote 75. All of us must be engaged. God bless you, and I look to see you in the near future at the victory celebration. God bless you.
Next up, please welcome civil rights activist Maya Berry. She's the executive director of the Arab American Institute. Please welcome Maya Berry.
You guys look amazing. Reverend Al Sharpton, Martin Luther King III, thank you for your leadership. To the National Action Network, thank you for convening us today. To the families who've lost loved ones to racist violence, I am so sorry for the pain you have been forced to endure. I'm humbled to stand and march alongside you today and every day. My name is Maya Berry, and I'm the executive director of the Arab American Institute. On behalf of 3.7 million Arab Americans across the country, I stand here today with you in defense of Black lives. We do so because it is right, and regrettably, because it is necessary to declare that Black lives matter. We do so because we understand that until the killing of Black men, women, and children stops, until systematic racism and anti-Blackness is addressed, the America we all desire cannot be realized. For each life taken, each family destroyed, each neighborhood brutally patrolled, and for each protester taking to the streets to demand that all this stop, targeted by the same system of policing, justice will not be served by reforming tactics or trainings. Here's a simple truth. It's been 168 days since Breonna Taylor was killed in her own home. No charges have been filed. The system is not broken. It is working as it was designed, and we must change it. Today, we must recommit to defend Black lives, to end police brutality, and the racist system that upholds it. We must recommit to fight voter suppression and the impact of a politicized decennial census like we have never seen. Just as the 1963 march and the mass demonstrations in communities across the country shepherded the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, we must not stop until we have secured the passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, the Khalid Jabara and Heather Heyer No Hate Act, and the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Just as matter is the minimum, these important legislative priorities must be where we start. Thank you.
This is all good that we
please welcome to the stage Dr. Jamal Bryant. He's a visionary, civil rights activist, community organizer. Dr. Jamal Harrison Bryant combines sound biblical teaching, business acumen, and political insight to propel the body of Christ to action and greater levels of faith. His ability to reach across social, economic, and political barriers has helped people not only experience the life-changing gospel of Jesus Christ, but to activate success in their everyday lives. His ministry has become an incubator for entrepreneurs, homeowners, and like Dr. Bryant, is the senior pastor of New Birth Missionary Baptist Church in Lithonia, Georgia. Please welcome Dr. Jamal Bryant.
To our convener, organizer, and visionary, the man who God has anointed for this hour, Reverend Al Sharpton, we thank him for his courage and for his faith and for his distinction, as well as his commitment to civil rights down through the years. Brothers and sisters, not since 44 BC, when Marcus Aurelius Junius Brutus led 59 accomplices to stab Julius Caesar in the back, has there been such a heinous crime as the slaying of Jacob Blake. 7 times they shot him in the back. And today, while it is that you stand, Jacob finds himself paralyzed from the waist down. Not from these steps, but Dr. King said that we as a people should not find ourselves caught in the paralysis of analysis. In other words, our coming together is in vain if we just talk about the problems, but don't chart a course towards the solution. It's Harriet Tubman who said, "I freed thousands of slaves, but I would have freed hundreds more had they known they were slaves." I only thought about that when I saw the slaves on TV this week endorsing Donald Trump. I said, if only they knew they were slaves, they could have been rendered free. We cannot remain paralyzed. We can't be paralyzed wondering whether or not we're going to support the very first black female vice president in the United States. Don't tell me about what it is that she did in the past and you not talk about what she wants to do in America in the future. She wants to make sure that we get rid of privatized prisons, that there are no more mandatory minimums, and marijuana is no longer an illegal substance. We cannot be paralyzed knowing that she graduated just a few miles from here, from the original HU. And those of us who are products of HBCUs, you ought to be making some noise right now, knowing what it can develop and what it can deliver. We cannot be paralyzed. We cannot allow white evangelicals to paralyze us, saying that they cannot support our agenda because they're for pro-life. Don't tell me you're for pro-life and white evangelicals are silent when black people are dying in the street like dogs. We cannot be paralyzed. The black church, you cannot be paralyzed, saying that you're not going to support Black Lives Matter because of 3 fearless black sisters who happen to be lesbian. We've got to love our LGBTQ community, realizing that those are our sons and those are our daughters. We cannot be paralyzed. We cannot be paralyzed into believing Mr. Jones' water is colder. This is the time where we've got to support black businesses because too many of them are closing down because of COVID-19. Not because they don't have adequate service, but because they don't have adequate support. But what America has to know about the tenacity of black people is that even when you render us paralyzed, we still know how to crawl. And on November 3rd, no matter what you do, we gonna crawl to the polls. If you take away the mailbox, we still gonna crawl. You take away the polling stations away from our community, we still gonna crawl. We gonna sing the original gangster rap music. Before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go on to my Lord and be free. We still gonna crawl. There is something about us that understands that we stand today with our brother Jacob, realizing that even if we find ourselves paralyzed and you force us to crawl, we are like butterflies, because butterflies only have two options. They crawl and then they fly. And we understand in this hour, this is the hour for black people to fly. Maya Angelou said, you can write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. But still like dust, we rise, we rise, we rise. And if you don't know Maya Angelou, the least you can do is loan the Migos. And black people from here until November 3rd, we gotta walk it like we talk it. We gotta keep moving until our generation takes the baton, changes the country, and makes America great for the very first time. Black people, rise up and accomplish what you will.
Of mothers from Georgia, are you in the house? Georgia came? All right. Next up, please welcome Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. She is serving her 13th term as a member of the United States House of Representatives. She serves the 18th Congressional District of Texas, centered in Houston, the energy capital of the world, and sits on 3 congressional committees: the House Committee, the Judiciary and Homeland Security Committee, and the crucial Budget Committee. She's the author of the Emancipation National Historic Trail Study Act and the lead sponsor for H.R. 40, the commission to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans. Please welcome Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee.
I am a black mother who happens to be a congresswoman. I'm a black mother who happens to understand that black lives do matter every single day of my life. Standing on these historic steps, grabbing on to the history of what the Lincoln Monument means to all of us who have a birthright in this nation to be able to live in dignity, I understand the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, who said that the Negro people have been given a bad check, a check which has come to be marked insufficient funds. Today we stop the insufficient funds and we put money in the bank because we've got to heal this nation. And so I say to you, why we can't wait. Why we can't wait when those assigned to protect and serve are able to grab the T-shirt of a black man named Jacob and point a gun in his black skin and shoot 7 times. Why we can't wait. Why we can't wait when those who are assigned to protect and serve can take Big Floyd, put a knee on his neck and say, I can't breathe. And then we know that we have to change this nation when we have Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, and Michael Brown, and many others. And so today we come to acknowledge that we ask America not to fear us. We ask you not to send tweets that we are attacking you as a mob. because the militia walks around freely and shoots us without anyone's concern. And so we are standing here today to say why we can't wait. We want an America that will stomp out the divisiveness, the intimidation, and the threat. We want a White House who stands as a healer in chief, who understands black mothers' pain and understands your pain. And then, of course, we want to make sure that as we do this, we know that H.R. 40 is intertwined with the bill I helped write, which is the bill of George Floyd, Justice and Policing Act. And so here we are today asking the question, how did this happen? Because of institutional racism. And I am here to tell you that we must have the commission to study and develop, as my brothers and sisters have said, reparation proposals. We must answer the call of institutional racism. We have got to make sure that the social, economic, psychological, scientific, and educational government-sanctioned institutional racism stops right now. And as I told a 12-year-old, as I walked and told Martin Luther King's third daughter, that now today, this attack on us as people of color who died on the battles of warfare, who have died on the streets for civil rights, it will stop today. Thank you, Reverend Sharpton and the National Action Network, for understanding the importance of the Congress with over 150 co-sponsors in the House, passing H.R. 40. We will heal the nation, but we will not stop until the nation knows Black Lives Matter and reparations are passed as the most significant civil rights legislation of the 21st century. Now is the time. Why we can't wait.
Reparations now. Let's hear it for Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Reparations now. Our next speaker from Ohio is a powerhouse who stands with the people, serving as vice chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and first ever chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee. A sought-after public speaker and previously recognized as one of Ebony Magazine's 150 most powerful African Americans in the United States. She has written 93 pieces of legislation and co-sponsored over 1,600 bills. She is calling on Congress to recognize racism as a national crisis. And we got a Delta up here now, Delta Sigma Theta sorority. We have a lot of AKAs. Any Deltas here? And she's also a member of the Lynx. Please welcome Congresswoman Joyce Beatty.
Hey, good to see you. Thank you. I am joined by members of the powerful Congressional Black Caucus. We are here today because people died and were denied civil and economic rights. We are here today because 57 years ago, people marched for jobs and freedom and stood here with members of Congress and Martin Luther King. We are here today because George Floyd had a knee on his neck. 8 minutes, 46 seconds. Black Lives Matter. We are here, and I stand representing the Congressional Black Caucus, 54 members strong, who understand silence is not an option because black people face a symbolic chokehold every time we walk, speak up, shop, jog, drive, and yes, breathe. So we must tear down the walls of injustice. I am standing here and saying, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, in America, a riot is the language of unheard people. And what is it that America has failed to hear? Promises and freedom and justice for all. Say their names: Ahmaud, Breonna, George, Jacob, and the list goes on. Black lives matter. So let us pass the George Ford Justice in Policing Act. No more immunity for officers who looked boldly into cell phone cameras as they kill our brothers and sisters. Mandatory databases. Tamar Rice would have lived to see his 18th birthday. A ban on chokeholds and no-knock warrants. Eric Garner and Breonna Taylor would still be alive today. We are pushing to recognize racism as a national crisis. We are fighting for jobs, housing relief, access to capital, and a reparations bill. No, it was the black men, the brothers of the Congressional Black Caucus, who wrote the First Step Act. Know that it is a powerful black man in leadership who leads the John Lewis voting rights legislation. Demand the Senate to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act that restores justice, dignity, and equal access to the ballot box. I say to you, stand with us and stand with the Reverend Al Sharpton and the National Action Network for this march and demanding that we get people registered to vote and that we vote, that we complete our census. Say it with me. Go vote, go vote, go vote, go vote. And let me say, tell them to get their knees off of our necks. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And yes, I'm Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, and I approve this message.
Thank you to Congresswoman Beatty. As we said before, going back to 1963, organized labor has been a part of this. Here is the president of the 1.7 million member American Federation of Teachers, AFL-CIO, which represents teachers, paraprofessionals, school-related personnel, higher education faculty and staff, nurses, and other healthcare professionals, local, state, and federal government employees, and early childhood educators. Please welcome the president of the American Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingarten, and she'll be joined on stage by Everett Kelly of the American Federation of Government Employees, and our brother Ken from the International Union, Ken Rickmadian of the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. You all welcome them as they come. Organized labor, y'all. Give them a round of applause.
Okay, Everett Kelly.
Good evening, brothers and sisters. I want to thank Nan and Reverend Al Sharpton, Martin Luther King III, for convening this march. I'm here today to represent 700,000 men and women making up AFGE, American Federation of Government Employees. It is an honor to be here. We are a diverse union. We're from all across the country, all ages, all abilities, We provide every single type of service to the American public. What unites us? Well, what brings us together is one big labor union. FGE, we believe in fairness. We believe in due process. FGE believes that every American deserves a good job and every American deserves decent pay and full benefits. Every single person deserves that. FGE believes in universal health care. We believe in universal housing, universal education, universal and equal justice under the law. We believe in the VA system, Social Security, and all the programs of the federal government that make people live better. We believe that the government should be a force for good, that the government should protect us and not scare us, not suppress us. So we are here today to let you know that we will stand with you. Can we do this together? Can we do this together? If we can do this together, let me hear you say together. When I was a little boy, I used to hear my grandmother say that I don't feel no ways tired. I didn't understand it then, but I sure understand it now. I don't feel tired. I'm ready to march. I'm ready to move. I'm ready to make a difference. Let's change this country. Thank you.
Henrik Median from IUPAT.
IUPAT's in the house? Where you at? Somebody say something. I'm Ken Rick Maiden, General President of the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. We're a building trades union. You may think it's unusual for us to be here, but with me, growing up with a father, with a mother who looked like me, Black Lives Matter, don't they? Black Lives Matter? Black Lives Matter. I stand on the shoulders of my father and all black tradesmen who fought for better wages and conditions. Without their fight, I wouldn't be here today. Recently, we celebrated the 100th anniversary of IUPAT Local 1332. You may not think much about that. That's one of our unions that was a traditional African American union, formed over 100 years ago because they couldn't be in the regular union. But 100 years later, still up and fighting and a part of our organization. This is an opportunity for us because when I see the street, I don't just see people who look like me. I see America. And this is our opportunity to go forward and our opportunity to grow and our opportunity to have the country that has the vision that we have. All lives matter, but Black Lives Matter on top. Black Lives Matter first. Somebody say it, it's easy. Black Lives Matter.
7 bullets in a man's back at point range. A knee pressed into a man's neck for 8 minutes. How much pain must black people endure? When will justice prevail? When is enough enough? There is pain in this country, in Louisiana and Texas, after another hurricane, in California, in the midst of raging fires, across the country, Donald Trump, with 180,000 people dead from COVID. And in so many families' hearts over the shooting of Jacob Blake, there is pain. So, Reverend Sharpton, how many times over how many decades have I and my union joined in this journey for justice? The 63 March started as a labor march for jobs and justice. A. Philip Randolph and Byron Rustin invited Martin Luther King Jr. to speak that day. And King said, "We've come to dramatize a shameful condition." That shameful condition, prejudice, discrimination, economic inequality, has not been cured. It's been metastasized. Underfunded schools, voter suppression, substandard housing, healthcare, and transportation, insufficient wages, high unemployment, discriminatory policing, mass incarceration. Black Americans who, whether from their higher rate of deaths from asthma or from COVID, have been struggling to breathe long before Eric Garner and George Floyd were suffocated at the hands of authorities. Justice and freedom must apply to all. The fight for opportunity and freedom must be all of our fights. And those of us who are white, we need to be real allies, real listeners, and real supporters. My synagogue's credo is the Psalm, and I quote, that the stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. There is room for all of us, but we must call out those who cling so tightly to their privilege that is an oppressive tool against equality. So, my friends, my colleagues, November 3rd is coming. We need to get in good trouble. We need to vote. We need to have hope. We need a president who will sign the bills that the House has passed to make this country more fair, more just, more equal. That is our job this day and every day. Thank you.
Can you recognize the Postal Union? Just acknowledge. Don't let me speak. Acknowledge Postal Union.
And then I also, as you all know, need to recognize the Postal Workers Union.
All right. No time. Thank you. All right. Cheers for organized labor. Let's hear it for organized labor. Give them a round of applause. No time for them to speak, but the Postal Workers Union is in the house. Pray for our postal workers. Our next speaker in the Obama administration served as Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Secretary of Labor, and now today he is the chair of the Democratic National Committee. Our friend and brother, please welcome Tom Perez.
All right. Good afternoon. Thank you, Reverend Sharpton and Martin Luther King III for your extraordinary leadership. Thank you to the National Action Network. Folks, I live in Maryland. We lost a remarkable person last year when my fellow Marylander and mentor Elijah Cummings passed away. And before he passed away, he reminded us all of our civic duty. He said, when we're dancing with the angels, the question will be asked, what did we do to make sure we kept our democracy intact? Did we stand on the sidelines and say nothing? Or did we fight back? Did we fight back for justice? Did we fight back for equality? Did we fight back for black lives? By being here today, you are answering all those questions with a resounding yes. We are all fighting back, but our fight cannot end here. Just as we march to this mall, we must march to Congress, to the United States Senate in particular, to demand passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. Just as we march to this mall, we must march to the ballot box or the mailbox to demand the leadership we deserve. And we must exercise the right that protects all others, the right to vote. As you well know, our nation is hurting right now. Our African American communities are hurting. We're hurting from a pandemic that has taken 180,000 lives, hurting from an economic crisis that has cost millions of jobs, from a climate emergency that threatens the air we breathe and the water we drink, hurting from an epidemic of violence and racism, a cancer of the soul. We're hurting from a knee on their neck, a bullet in their back, hurting from leadership that treats them like their lives don't matter. President Lincoln, you would not recognize today's Republican Party. Our African American brothers and sisters are not alone. Dr. King spoke of the inescapable network of mutuality. In this moment of crisis, so many Americans are bound together in the mutual struggle for justice, dignity, and opportunity. From the Native American tribes confronting the scourge of COVID and the delay of their stimulus funding, to Latinx children being separated from their parents at the border, to Asian Americans facing hate-fueled attacks, to working families across this country struggling with poverty. We can change all of this. With the right leadership, we can heal our wounds. We can turn hardship into hope, despair into dreams. We can advance racial equality and restore the soul of our nation. But only if we do it together. Movements are built by the many, not the few. They're built by the hard and unglamorous work of grassroots organizing. They're built, in the words of the late, great Julian Bond, by the marchers whose feet have grown tired, whose voices have gone hoarse, whose shirts have stained with sweat and dirt and blood. John Lewis, as you know, left us with these marching orders. So go to iwillvote.com, iwillvote.com. Check your registration status. Tell your friends, family, and neighbors to make a plan to vote. Remember, November 3rd is the last day to vote, but it's not the first day to vote. Make a plan. Get out there. Do not let your voice go unheard. Do not let your voice go uncounted. This is the most important election of our lifetime. And make no mistake, you have the power to decide the outcome. Thank you very much.
Today, we commemorate the 57th anniversary of the historic March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. I was born into an activist family with my parents, my aunts and uncles pushing me in a stroller through Bay Area streets marching for justice in the years following the March on Washington. This moment is a reminder that we must always honor the sacrifice of the leaders who made that march happen. From the names we know, like Randolph and Farmer, Young and King, to everyone who worked behind the scenes and sacrificed quietly but profoundly, far from the lights of history. I have to believe that if they were with us today, they would share in our anger and frustration as we continue to see black men and women slain in our streets and left behind by an economy and justice system that have too often denied black folks our dignity and rights. They would share our anger and pain, but no doubt they would turn it into fuel. They would be lacing up their shoes, locking arms, and continuing right alongside us to continue in this ongoing fight for justice. Thankfully, we don't have to wonder if we are making them proud, because a giant from that march and the civil rights era of that day, John Lewis, he lived to tell us how we're doing. In his parting essay, he wrote to all of us who hope to carry his legacy, quote, "In the last days and hours of my life, you inspired me. You filled me with hope about the next chapter of the great American story when you used your power to make a difference in our society." For Congressman Lewis, the brutal murder of Emmett Till is what shook loose the activist inside him. It was the start of a lifelong journey toward service and driving change, the same journey that countless young leaders are building upon as we speak. As John put it, Emmett Till was my George Floyd. He was my Rayshard Brooks, Sandra Bland, and Breonna Taylor. The road ahead, it is not going to be easy. But if we work together to challenge every instinct our nation has to return to the status quo and combine the wisdom of longtime warriors for justice with the creative energy of the young leaders today, we have an opportunity to make history right here and right now. So thank you so much for inviting me to celebrate with you. Let's march on in the name of our ancestors and in the name of our children and grandchildren. Thank you.
Let's hear it for Senator Kamala Harris. Our next speaker is one of the Legacy original organizations. that was here in 1963 in the person of Whitney Young. Please welcome the former mayor of New Orleans, the president and CEO of the National Urban League, Mark Morrell.
Black Lives Matter. I want to thank Reverend Al Sharpton and the National Action Network, my friend and brother, as well as Martin Luther King III, for assembling us here on August 28th in the year 2020. In 1963, courageous men and women descended on this site, led by 6 legacy civil rights organizations, including the National Urban League. At that time, the National Urban League was led by one of the great Americans of the 20th century, Whitney M. Young, Jr. He stated from this very place at that time and on that day, on August 28, 1963, that our civil rights, our voting rights, our rights to human dignity were not negotiable. We have come back on August 28th in the year of 2020, in this 21st century, to say today that our fight for racial justice is not negotiable. We're here today to say that transforming our criminal justice system and purging it of mass incarceration and systemic racism is not negotiable. That protecting our sacred right to vote from suppressors, be they legislators, be they presidents, be they Russians, is not negotiable. That defending our right to a living wage so that every American can live in dignity is not negotiable. That dislodging structural racism that infects every institution in American life is not negotiable. That equitably funding all of our schools so all of our children can learn, and providing them with computers and broadband connectivity, and they can live and thrive with their God-given talents is not negotiable. That a fair and accurate census so that all of us are counted in accordance with the Constitution is not in 2020 negotiable. That eliminating the structural and shameful disparate impact of COVID-19 in 2020 is not negotiable. That reforming police, both police policies and police culture, and reallocating funding to summer jobs for youth, to mental health services, to homeless services, and to end the violence against our black man is not negotiable. Hands up. I can't breathe. Hands up. Don't shoot. In 1963, when they gathered on this site, brothers and sisters, just a few weeks before they gathered, that great civil rights leader, Medgar Evers, was assassinated on the front lawn of his home in Jackson, Mississippi. At that time, they were fighting a poll tax, a literacy test, I should say, that did everything possible to prevent us from voting. In 2020, we come here when the very success of 1963, the Voting Rights Act, has been gutted by the Supreme Court. We come in 2020 where Jacob Blake and George Floyd and Eric Garner and Tamir Rice and Trayvon Martin and Sandra Bland and too many black men and women, Breonna Taylor, have died or been disabled at the hands of the police. So we're here to make some demands. Number one, we want the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act to pass now, not tomorrow, not next week, not next year. Say it. Pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Number two, we want to pass the HEROES Act. Number three, we want to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And number 4, we want to pass H.R. 40 to look at reparations in this country. November 3rd, we will vote. So we're going to vote. If we have to go by fight or train or unicycle, if we have to walk, if we have to run, if we have to, we will vote.
Let's hear it for our brother Mark Morial of the Urban League, NUL.org. All right. Here to introduce the man who is the namesake of the person who spoke here August 28, 1963. Here to introduce one of our men of the hour, Martin Luther King III, is none other than the congressman representing the 9th Congressional District of Texas, Congressman Al Green.
Thank you, everyone. It is now my honor to introduce a man whose name is synonymous with the civil rights, human rights movement. A man whose father stood here 57 years ago. A man who followed his father's footsteps, and I was there with him to India where he traced the steps of Gandhi. A man who understands that this is a full-time job. He's not a part-time freedom fighter. He's not an everyday freedom fighter. He's an all-the-time freedom fighter. I'm here to introduce a man who's a Morehouse graduate, a man who knows what it feels like to suffer the pains associated with the human rights movement. When he lost his father at the age of 10, he could have given up, but he didn't. He stayed in and he has fought the good fight. I'm here to introduce the Honorable Martin Luther King III. Would you show him some love, please? If you believe in liberty and justice for all, stand up and show him some love. If you believe in government of the people, by the people, stand up and show him some love. Show Martin some love. Show his father some love, his mother some love, his wife Andrea some love, his daughter Yolanda some love. Show them some love. God bless you. God bless the King family.
Good afternoon. I am so honored to be here. But before I say something, I want you to hear from the future of our nation. The only granddaughter of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King, my daughter and Andrea's daughter, Yolanda Renee King.
Should I roll this? Okay. Some of you may remember that 2 years at the March for Our Lives, I said, spread the word. Have you heard? All across the nation, we are going to be a great generation. That was in 2018. I didn't know what would hit us in 2020. A pandemic that shut our schools and put our young lives on hold. More killings of unarmed black people by police. Attacks on our right to vote. The worst economic crisis since the Great Depression that we learned about in school. And more extreme weather than ever before. But great challenges produce great leaders. We have mastered the selfie and TikToks. Now we must master ourselves. Less than a year before he was assassinated, my grandfather predicted this very moment. He said that we were moving into a new phase of the struggle. The first phase was the civil rights, and the new phase is genuine equality. Genuine equality is why we are here today and why people are coming together all across the world, from New Zealand to New Jersey. He said that we must not forget the days of Montgomery. We must not forget the sit-ins movement. We must not forget the freedom rides, the Birmingham movement, and Selma. Papa King, we won't! My generation has already taken to the streets peacefully and with masks and socially distanced to protest racism. And I want to ask the young people here to join me in pledging that we have only just begun to fight and that we will be the generation that moves from me to we. We are going to be the generation that dismantles systemic racism once and for all, now and forever. We are going to be the generation that calls a halt to police brutality and gun violence once and for all, now and forever. We are going to be the generation that reserves climate change and saves our planet once and for all, now and forever. And we are going to be the generation that ends poverty here in America, the wealthiest nation on earth, once and for all, now and forever. We are the great dreams of our grandparents, great-grandparents, and all our ancestors. We stand and march for love, and we will fulfill my grandfather's dream. So, show me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
One last time. Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Okay, then let's show them.
Yolanda. A proud dad. Let me thank God that we've been able to assemble today, and to thank Reverend Sharpton and the National Action Network and all of the conveners that actually are here today, and most of all, these families that have been impacted by police brutality and misconduct. So we've come to bear witness, to remain awake, to remember from where we've come, and to carefully consider where we're going. Whether you're here in person, online, or watching on MSNBC and other networks, thank you for joining us for this March on Washington. Together, we are taking a stand, and we're taking a giant step forward. Let me also thank Al Green for the very, very warm introduction, my dear friend. But we're taking a step forward on America's rocky but righteous journey towards justice. August 28th is a day to remember the triumphs and tragedies that have taken place in our historic struggle for racial justice. Today, we commemorate the March on Washington to Jobs and Freedom in 1963, where my father declared his dream. But we must never forget the American nightmare of racist violence exemplified when Emmett Till was murdered on this day in 1955, and the criminal justice system failed to convict his killers. 65 years later, we still struggle for justice, demilitarizing the police, dismantling mass incarceration, and declaring and determinedly as we can that Black lives matter. In our struggle for justice, there are no permanent victories. For on this day, 12 years ago, I was honored to address the Democratic National Convention in Denver. And on that night, on that evening in the Mile High City, our spirits were soaring as the Democrats nominated Barack Obama, who would go on to become the first African-American president of these United States. But the progress we celebrated then is imperiled yet again. And now we must march to the ballot box and the mailboxes to defend the freedoms that earlier generations worked so hard to win. In so many ways, we stand together today in the symbolic shadow of history. But we are making history together right now. We're marching with the largest and most active multi-generational, multiracial movement for civil rights since the 1960s. From high school students to senior citizens, black as well as white, Latino, Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islanders, Americans are marching together, many for the first time, and we're demanding real, lasting, structural change. We are marching together for time-honored goals and in timely ways. We are courageous, but conscious of our health. We are socially distant, but spiritually united. We are masking our faces, but not our faith in freedom. And we are taking our struggle to the streets and to social media. The nation has never seen such a mighty movement, a modern day incarnation of what my father called the coalition of conscience. And if we move forward with purpose and passion, we will complete the work so boldly began in the 1960s. We're marching to overcome what my father called were the triple evils of poverty, racism, and violence. And today, those evils have exacerbated 4 major challenges that currently face our country. First, COVID-19 tragically has killed more than 175,000 Americans, disproportionately African American, Latino, and low-income people in every background. Second, more than 30 million Americans are unemployed again, disproportionately people of color. COVID-19 has laid bare the structural and racial inequalities in our economy that kept too many people trapped in the debt and poverty. Third, police brutality and gun violence are killing so many unarmed African Americans. Today, we march with their families and we say their names. George Floyd, Boham Jean, Breonna Taylor, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Yusef Richardson, Terrence Crutcher, Trayvon Martin, Ahmaud Arbery, Elijah McClain, and so many others. And fourth, our voting rights are under attack. We must vigorously defend our right to vote because those rights were paid for with the blood of those lynched for seeking to exercise their constitutional rights. They were paid for with the blood of civil rights workers such as Sammy Young Jr., Goodman, Swerney, and Cheney, Jimmy Lee Jackson, Viola Liuzzo, James Reed. Those rights were paid for through the sacrifices made by heroes such as C.T. Vivian, Fannie Lou Hamer, Hosea Williams, and John Lewis. But since the United States Senate has failed to renew the Voting Rights Act, we have had to overcome a whole new trick bags of tactics to suppress our votes. Discriminatory voter ID requirements, cutbacks in early voting and vote by mail, voter purges targeting those who have missed several elections, and disenfranchising those who have served their time and paid their debt to the society. And now COVID-19 is making it dangerous, even deadly, to stand in line at polling places. We shouldn't have to risk our lives to cast our votes. We need to be able to do what President Trump does, vote safely by mail. But now we are struggling to overcome the dismantling of the U.S. Postal Service for the express purpose of suppressing our vote. With all these threats to our lives and liberties, our challenge is to use this moment to expand this movement, a movement that not only raises its voice, but casts its votes, pursues its vision, and makes lasting change. The scripture says, where there is no vision, the people perish. Our vision is best expressed by a phrase we must never forget. That is the beloved community. With those words, my father, John Lewis, Ella Baker, Rosa Parks, and so many other historic women and men envision an America whose dramatic practice is as good as its promise. An America where the triple evils of poverty, racism, and violence will be replaced by peace, justice, and shared abundance. And where hate and fear finally give way to help and love. To achieve that America, we need to raise our voices and cast our votes. Over the weeks ahead, culminating on Election Day, we need to vote as if our lives and our livelihoods, our liberties depend on it, because they do. No person, no people are more keenly aware of the risk of disenfranchisement than those who've suffered from it. There's a knee upon the neck of democracy, and our nation can only live so long without the oxygen of freedom. The strength must be exercised by more than rhetoric and more than marching. The simple challenge before us is that everyone can cast a ballot, and everyone who can must cast a ballot. And that ballot that is cast must be counted, and the result must be transparent and known to the whole world. And so today, I can call on everyone with the means to drive people to the polls, to make a plan for yourself, for your family and your neighbor, for those organizations and companies that care about democracy. I call on you today to offer your resources and your capacity to make sure every ballot is counted. If our forefathers were willing to die for the right to vote, we can work for the right to vote. And I will continue to call on you to act in the coming days. You know, my father was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, while standing in solidarity with poor working people, sanitation workers, whose slogans, I am a man, was a statement that they were human beings with rights that should be respected and acknowledged. They were asking for safe working conditions, for a living wage, for recognition of their union, and for human dignity. They summed up their struggle with those 4 words, I am a man. That simple but powerful slogan impairs movements today from Black Lives Matter to Fight for 15 and to the Me Too struggle against sexual harassment and abuse. Movements of marginalized Americans are still trying to claim the dignity they've been denied. Martin Luther King Jr. fought for the dignity of work, and that fight is never ending. In 1963, the March on Washington demanded jobs and freedoms. In 1968, the Memphis sanitation strike workers that demanded, and the Poor People's Campaign insisted that working people should not live and labor in poverty. Those fights foreshadowed our struggle today to make the minimum wage a living wage, not a poverty wage. And we are fighting alongside the frontline workers, sanitation workers, healthcare workers, grocery workers, transport workers, food service workers, and so many more. They are praised for being essential, but they are treated as if they're expendable. While standing with sanitation workers in Memphis, Dad said, so often we overlook the work and the significance of those who are not in professional jobs, of those who are not in the so-called big jobs. But let me say to you tonight that wherever you are or whenever you are engaged in work that serves humanity and is for the building of humanity, it has dignity and worth. Now we have a president who confesses greatness with grandiosity. But my father knew better. Everyone, he said, can be great because everyone can serve. He understood the human yearning for recognition. And in his famous speech, he explained that everyone wants to be a drum major, the leader of the marching band. And he challenged us to channel our drum major instinct into becoming drum majors for justice. While we honor our history, we must be a living movement, not a monument. If Dad were here today, I'm sure he would implore us not to deify him or selectively quote him when convenient. He would want us to be drama majors for justice, to champion the ideals he promoted, racial justice, social equality, and peace. And he would gently but intently challenge us not to dwell upon the past, but to live and labor in what he called the fierce urgency of now. So if you're looking for a savior, get up and find a mirror. We must become the heroes of the history we are making. And us means all of us. In 1963, after my father spoke, Bayard Rustin, the architect of the march, asked the participants to join in demanding that Congress pass strong civil rights and voting rights laws. More than half a century later, we must demand that the United States Senate stop blocking passage of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Restoration Act. And so when we conclude today, let's remember that this is the commitment march in the spirit of 1963. I ask you to join me in pledging to act in three ways. First, because our civil and human rights are at stake in this election, I ask you not only to register and vote, but make sure that at least one other person registers and votes. Second, I ask you to commit to service and struggle in your community, from voter registration to raising the minimum wage, to demilitarizing the police. Get involved with one or more of many worthwhile struggles in your community. And third, I ask you to pledge, as my father and John Lewis did, to get into good trouble and do it nonviolently. Remember that in the fight against injustice, nonviolence doesn't mean passive acceptance. It means peaceful resistance. We must come together and join with the Black Lives Movement to raise our voices and say enough is enough. We must come with the Poor People's Campaign, the Climate Change and Environmental Justice Movement, the Women's March and Me Too movement, the Parkland students and March for Our Lives, and say enough is enough. Martin Luther King Jr. famously said that the moral arc of the universe is long but bends toward justice. But he was also the first to say that it doesn't bend on its own. We must do some work ourselves. In the final year of his life, he wrote in his last book, "Where do we go from here, chaos or community?" Well, my sisters and brothers and dear friends, in this defining moment for our history and our country, we must answer Dr. King's question. Will our answer be chaos or community? I believe some have chosen the answer with chaos, including the current occupant in the White House today. But we who believe must choose community, because if we choose community, we can avoid watching the dream turn into a permanent nightmare. If we choose community, 50 years from now, people will say that we were able to redeem the soul of America and begin to fulfill the promise of democracy by systematically eliminating systematic racism and exploitation. My friends, if we choose community, we will be able to answer in the affirmative to the scripture. Here comes that dreamer. Come, let's slay him, and we shall see what will become of his dream. Finally, this afternoon, I want to say to you, not only do I come as a protester, but I come as a victim. My daddy was killed when I was 10 years old. Gunned down, you know that, by assassin's bullet. Some of you know but may not know. 6 years later, my daddy's mother, my grandmother, was gunned down in the church while praying the Lord's Prayer. So I understand what it means to lose a loved one. But I was so thankful that my grandfather and my mother and my aunts and uncles taught me about love, because granddaddy used to say, I refuse to allow any person to reduce me to hatred. The man that killed my lovely wife and the man that killed my son, I refuse to allow them even to reduce me to hatred. I love everybody. I'm every man's brother. If we're going to resolve these issues in America, We've got to come together. Dad talked about it in that sermon, Levels of Love. He talked about all of them. I'm only going to talk about the highest level of love. That love that seeks nothing in return. That love that is totally unselfish. You love someone if they're young, you love them if they're old. You love them if they're black, you love them if they're white. You love them if they're Native American. You love them if they're Hispanic or Latino American. You love them if they're African. You love them if they're Asian. You love them because you know that God calls you to do that. And if we're going to resolve all of these conflicts and crises in America, we got to find a way to do it in love. Thank you, and God bless you. And let's keep on keeping on.
Hello, 57th March on Washington. I'm Joy Ann Reid from MSNBC, and I wish that I could be there with you today, as Reverend Al Sharpton is my colleague, my friend, my off-the-record pastor, and my big brother. I arrived in East Flatbush, Brooklyn, New York in 1986 at age 18, having left when I was 2. It was an era when Black Lives Matter meant Michael Griffiths, Yusuf Hawkins, Sean Bell, Amadou Diallo, Patrick Dorisman, and Gavin Cato. It meant the Central Park Five and the replacement of New York City's first black mayor, David Dinkins, with Giuliani time. A stay away if you're black Bensonhurst and Howard Beach, and Reverend Al Sharpton, who was the only one who seemed to know what to do and who cared enough to do it. A generation earlier, it was Jesse Jackson, and before him, Dr. King. But for my generation, it was Reverend Al. Little did I know that many years later, I would get to know Rev as a local producer and host on Radio 1, when he was our big national host, and that he would become my colleague at MSNBC and a great mentor, supporter, and friend. Meanwhile, the National Action Network has never stopped working, even as the names have changed to Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Sandra Bland, Tamir Rice, Freddie Gray, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Jacob Blake. I marched with Rev in Selma when he pulled me to the front of the line so that I could be there to witness history and John Lewis's second-to-last public appearance. And I've watched him nurture grieving families as they cry out for justice. He has marched on presidents and had presidents confide in him. He has inspired me to use my gifts to make real change. And he has been our backstop and our defender in dark times. We know that when we call him, he will be there and he will do something and cause something to be done. 57th anniversary march on Washington. Please join me in saluting our defender and my big brother, Reverend Al Sharpton.
No justice. No justice. No justice. No justice. What do we want? What do we want? What do we want? When do we want it? 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 All right. 57 years ago, in 1963, there was a struggle in Birmingham, Alabama. There was the assassination of Medgar Evers, the head of the Mississippi NAACP. In the middle of struggle and murder, they came to Washington to demand that the federal government give them a Civil Rights Act and voting rights. They marched that day, in a hot, blistering day like today, saying that as we struggle, we need legislation. And they stayed on that movement until they got the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. They came young and old. They came from the South. Many of them couldn't stop on the road to use a bathroom.
because it was against the law, but they came anyhow. Many of them couldn't stop and eat in a restaurant. They had to put their sandwiches in a paper bag because no restaurant would serve them because it was against the law, but they came anyhow. Many of them couldn't rest in a motel overnight, but they came anyway because it was against the law for them to stop. Because they came in 63, we were able to come back in 2020, riding whatever we wanted to ride, stay in whatever hotels was available. They opened the door for us, but there's still some doors we have to open and some people we've got to straighten out. 2020. We must deal with those that want to rob our right to vote. And even though we are here in the midst of a pandemic, socially distancing, telling y'all to distance, and I keep saying spread out, we want to come to show with our bodies that enough is enough. When I was headed to George Floyd's funeral, I talked with Martin III, and I said, you know, maybe we need to go back to Washington. He said, well, let's talk it out, Reverend Al. As I was giving the eulogy, I announced this march. We didn't know how we were going to do it, how we were going to plan it, how many would come, but we did it. Why are we in Washington? I talked with one of the leading minds of our nation, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, and he told me that, Reverend Al, you got to understand that until there's federal legislation, every state will do what it wants to do. We have passed in the House of Representatives the George Floyd Policing and Justice Act. Now we need to pass that act in the Senate. We need Mitch McConnell and the U.S. Senate to meet on the George Floyd Policing and Justice Act, or we're going to meet you senators at the poll in November 3rd, whether we got to mail in, walk in, ride in, crawl in. We want our bill passed. Several weeks ago, John Lewis, an outstanding congressman, made his transition. Last time Martin and I were here, he was with us, John Lewis. He and Reverend Hosea Williams and Amelia Boykin were beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, tear gassed, that led to the Selma to Montgomery March that got us the right to vote. And that right lasted till 2013 when they took and gutted out the middle of that bill, taking away the map. Well, we come to Washington saying, how do you memorialize John Lewis and allow the bill that he stood for us to die? We want the John Lewis Voting Rights Bill for the Congress. So we didn't just come today to have a show. Demonstration without legislation will not lead to change. We didn't come out and stand in this heat because we didn't have nothing to do. We come to let you know if we will come out by these numbers in the heat and stand in the heat that we will stand in the polls all day long. They keep telling me about how it's a shame that black parents have to have the conversation with our children. How we have to explain if a cop stops you, don't reach for the glove compartment. Don't talk back. The conversation. Well, we've had the conversation for decades. It's time we have a conversation with America. We need to have a conversation about your racism, about your bigotry, about your hate, about how you would put your knee on our neck while we cry for our lives. We need a new conversation. Oh, we didn't come to start trouble. We came to stop trouble. You act like it's no trouble to shoot us in the back. You act like it's no trouble to put a chokehold on us while we scream, "I can't breathe" 11 times. You act like it's no trouble to hold a man down on the ground until you squeeze the life out of him. It's time for a new conversation. I wondered why. I asked Dr. Dyson, why did they have the march at Lincoln's Memorial? Why didn't they go to the Jefferson Memorial? Why didn't they go to the Washington Monument? And he told me, you got to understand, Reverend Al, 100 years before 1963 was 1863. 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. He promised us full citizenship if we fought to save the Union. He promised us 40 acres and a mule. We never got the full citizenship. We never got the reparations. We come to Lincoln because you promised, Mr. Lincoln, and the promise has been broken. And we come like Dr. King came 57 years ago to say we are tired of broken promises. Some say to me, Reverend Al, y'all ought to denounce those that get violent, those that are looting. All of the families have denounced looting. What we haven't heard is you denounce shooting. We will speak against the looting. But when will you speak against wrong police shooting? I remember Reverend Dr. Y.T. Walker sat Reverend W. Franklin Richardson, who spoke today, and sat us down and said that after the Montgomery boycott and they had gone to Albany, Georgia, and the movement stalled because in Albany they treated them with a certain kindness. They said they wanted to find someone that would demonstrate the raw disregard for rights. And as they did, they went all over the South. And Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth told them to come to Birmingham because there was a police chief there named Bull Connor. And Bull Connor would act in an insensitive and brutal way. Well, in 1963 and 1964, they fought Bull Connor. Here we are in 2020. We've gone from Bull Connor to Bull Trump. We've gone from a mean-spirited sheriff to a mean-spirited president whose lips drink with the words of interposition and nullification. We do not want to be disrespected. How do you speak while this young man, Jacob, lies in a hospital and you won't call his name? How do you sit while Breonna Taylor's in a grave and you won't call her name? How do you sit while Eric Garner's in a grave and you won't call his name? How do you sit while George Floyd is laying in a grave and you won't call his name? Well, Mr. Trump, look right down the block from the White House. We come to Washington by the thousands. We gonna call their name. We gonna call their name. We'll never let America forget what you done. Call their names. This is the time. This is the time for legislative change. This is the time for us to vote like we never voted before. And don't just vote for the top of the ticket. Vote all the way down. Go down from the top to the bottom. Vote all the way to the dog catcher. We want to get rid of anybody that's in our way, because our parents died to give us the right to vote. You can mess with the mail, but it ain't the sacrifice that Goodman and Cheney and Swerner gave. Our vote is dipped in blood. Our vote is dipped in those that went to their grave. We don't care how long the line. We don't care what you do. We're going to vote not for one candidate or the other, but we're going to vote for a nation that'll stop the George Floyds, that'll stop the Breonna Taylors.